So yeah, I'll make this very brief. I'll try to be as simple as possible. And Igor, if you want to chime in at some points, to lighten it up, let me know. Can I get a show of hands of who in this audience has actually heard about the detached accessory dwelling unit in Seattle? Yeah. And is anybody pursuing them outside of Seattle? Anybody? No? So, okay.
There's a big market in Canada.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. We'll have to talk about that, yeah. So I focus purely on Seattle's jurisdiction, right? Seattle's zoning code I know very well, and so that's where we focus. That's where there's the most flexibility and the most simplicity with these types of deals. So it's a unique market opportunity. It's a little niche. So I'm just going to briefly go through an overview of kind of what it has to offer for you guys. Real quick, what is this? You can see here there's a house and there is a detached accessory dwelling unit. There's no alley back here, but sometimes there is. And so the main walking path, if you can see along this rendering, is just right across the house, and this is actually very common. This is an active project. One of my very good friends, David Mulcahy, is actually flipping both the house and the backyard cottage, separating them and selling them separately. So this is a very unique project, one of the few in the city of its nature. And obviously, you can see here, they're not that small, right? This is a wide-angle photo, but the house is back there. These cottages are pretty big. Yeah, so this is a really nice project that it's actually, this one particularly sold in Maple Leaf, I believe, for $1.9 million just last year. So that's crazy. About a 3,000 square foot house in the front, an 800 square foot backyard cottage with a garage in the back, but a really nice, attractive situation. Just gives you some context of how these things are set up. All right, why is this an opportunity? Why do you care? This is achieving what goal? So in the marketplace today, talking about economics, right? The average salary in Seattle is only $80,000. Okay, now I say only $80,000. Of course, it'll buy you a juice bar membership, or Whole Foods, groceries. But to own a home, you're almost out of luck, personally. It's tough to afford a house in Seattle for the average person. You're looking at pretty much double the average income to afford an average townhome in the city. Let's say you can buy a beater house for $500,000. That's what you're looking at. And it's not cheap, yeah, to say the least. So let's talk about entry-level product. What are we comparing these detached accessory dwelling units to for the people who want to rent or potentially buy them? They're comparing them to townhomes in the area, typically, right? Nobody's going to buy a beater house and expect to be happy for long. They're going to improve it, and it'll take a lot more money to do that. So really, for the cheap properties, you're looking at a townhome. To do this, as the developer, you're talking about a year to permit just for paperwork. Then about another year, this is very aggressive. This is if you're a master builder, and if you're less experienced, double that to build, because you have to do them all at once. You have to do all of them at the same time, typically. And so then afterwards, you're dumping all of them on the market at the same time and expecting them all to sell. Assuming that there's enough buyers in the market to absorb that product, that's a lot of risk, and that's a lot of time for the developer. So they have to make a big margin. There's a lot of cost associated with it. The average unit lot for just the land, talking about what it costs to build. Now let's talk about what it costs to just buy the land itself. Roughly $125,000 to $225,000 is what I budget per unit lot. That means the underlying land for the townhome is worth that much money that you're paying for when you buy into one of these. And then the city also makes you pay an additional deposit of $25,000 on average just to the homeless fund that we've got going on. It's a new program. That's a new code that allows the city to do that. And so it's very expensive. All these costs add up. This time adds up into essentially what everybody has to buy in this marketplace. So in Capitol Hill, we can see something about 1,000 square feet entry level. Let's say you, the millennial, or you, the Generation X, who wants to climb these stairs. You're going to be paying about $700,000 in Capitol Hill, $500,000 in South Seattle, roughly around $600,000 for something very small around the city. But there is hope. So you can see the permitting time needed for one of these backyard cottages is significantly less. The time it takes to build is significantly less. You're literally not having to do 4 at once, you're just doing 1. So the market time, let's be conservative, they're about the same. And you're really talking about having the amount of time it takes to complete one of these projects. The average land cost for those townhomes, right, was between 100 to 200,000, let's say 150 to 250 about. And for a backyard cottage, when you think about, okay, let's say I want to do one of these projects myself, what am I really buying into? What's my risk? Your land cost is pretty much nothing. So, I mean, you can't find that very many places. Okay, actually, hold on a minute. Can I get a quick show of hands of who would rather own one of these units? You can see it's about this wide. There's 2 staircases here, maybe 15 feet wide if you can get maybe your imagination going. And then can I get a show of hands of people who would prefer this? So real quick, then this is the backyard cottage. So who would prefer the townhome, the regular townhome? Just so I can get an idea. Can you raise your hand? Who would prefer that one? And then who would prefer this little cottage in the city? Yeah, would most people? Okay. Let's see how the market responds to that question. I'll show you. We can see here that there's a really interesting value proposition. They're both in the same areas of Ballard. This is in Ballard. In fact, these units are a little further south, slightly in a better location. Let's compare apples to apples here. This sold around the same time, got put on market around the same time, and ended up selling for $550,000 for 1,050 square feet gross floor area. The backyard cottage, realistically, is a little bit less than 800 square feet when you really look into this. This includes some storage area. It sold in less time for more money for this, for a smaller structure. Interesting, right? That's compelling. That is, you don't see that every day in terms of, okay, well, what can I build where I know people are going to want it, right? Both these products target the same buyer pool. So going into maybe some excitement, let's whet our chops here. How far can you go? What's the highest value that these can achieve? And this is a very good example. It was done by a very experienced builder in Wallingford on 46th Street. Very nice location, not much of a yard, just a nice little car parking spot. $700,000. Think of that. We can talk about how much it costs to build one of those, but I think you can assume it's not going to take $700,000 to build. So what's going on here? Why is there an opportunity? What's changed? Why? I mean, there's an efficient market hypothesis, right? These things don't just come off and they're not so easy because other people are going to see the same opportunity and try to make it less of a deal. But recently, there was the code change. So new zoning. That allows change from 800 square feet to 1,000 square feet for DADUs now. Now you can include garages for your DADUs. And then also a big one. This is what everybody was worried about a couple years ago and last year. They lifted the owner occupancy requirement. So that means you as the investor can now not have to worry about saying, oh, well now one person has to be an owner occupant and one person can rent or vice versa. There's no limit now. So, and then the last one. Now you can do 2 ADUs on one single family zone lot. So you just increase the density from theoretically like 1 for investment to now 3 units.
So one ADU should be an attached ADU.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so either one attached or detached. Yeah.
2 detached ADUs.
So kind of an unconventional triplex here situation we're talking about. And for rental purposes, it's a good value proposition, right? All right, moving on to how you make money. This is where it gets really compelling. This is where it achieves my financial goals. And hopefully for you guys as well, it'll be that pocket where maybe you had something missing in your life, and this can be the solution for it. Buy a house that you're happy with it, and it makes sense 99% of the time to do the backyard cottage if you can do it. So you're going to buy a house that just makes sense as the house's value as is, whether you're going to buy it as a flip with Alex's help, or you're going to buy it as a rental because that's where you want to park your money, or maybe you want to live there. It always makes sense from a cash flow standpoint, from a number standpoint, to do the backyard cottage. You can either hold it as a rental or you could sell with, we can advise you on how to do that. And this is the real attractive part. Can you pay down the house when you create all this equity or potentially profit with a backyard cottage? Can you potentially move that money down in the house and just burr it like we've been talking about? That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. So here's my favorite example. This is what I'm specifically looking for in certain neighborhoods of Seattle, and we can go into more details. And usually I like to spend the first 15 minutes talking about numbers, but since we only have 15 minutes for this talk, this is all we got for now. A very basic example, but let's say you buy a house in okay condition for like, let's say $500,000, $500,000. You put $50,000 of hard costs in it, you renovate it, just lipstick flip. And so maybe afterwards it's worth like $600,000 if you were to just leave it. But because you're separating the backyard, you're creating the backyard cottage, the house's value in itself is really decreased by that lost land value. So let's call it $550,000 ARV, after repair value. Now let's talk about the DADU. When you do the DADU, it's going to cost you roughly $275,000. We've got builders who will sign a fixed price contract at $220,000 hard cost. You could probably say, permitting fees are going to be $20,000 about. So then you've got financing as well. Everybody thinks about that one because nobody wants to put all their money out of pocket. So that's your cost basis. This is your DADU value at the end. So from a mortgage standpoint, if you want to refinance this, you're at like a 55% loan to value. Let's say 50 to worst case scenario, 65% loan to value. Every lender out there is going to be able to give you money for these things as long as you know how to pitch it. As long as you know how to, when you have good consultants, right, you'll know how to go about that process. So what if you separate the house and the DADU, which we can go into more detail about how to do that at a later time. But if you separate the house and the DADU, what if you sell the DADU, pay down the mortgage of the house, what are you left with? Now this $550,000, the profit you take from the DADU, pays down the house to get to $350,000. The residual value of the house is $550,000. 65% loan to value. That's your cost basis. Will a lender give you a cash out refinance? Pull all your money out afterwards? Yes. And a lot of my friends have very successful projects. I can talk about really crazy scenarios here, but it is a compelling value proposition that is a very new thing. And realistically, I only see it like being this kind of opportunity for about a year. Maybe it'll take like 2 to 5 years for the rest of the market, most builders, to recognize the opportunity. But for me, who wants a very safe project, don't want too big, small scale, achieve incremental goals in my life, this is the one thing that I'm looking at. Just to give you some context about how it all fits in. So yeah, here's another photo. It's kind of weird, actually. It's kind of weird, it's tilted. But you can see here that the backyard cottage, this one, sold in Central District for $600,000, by the way. So you can see the backyard here is separated in half, just precisely. Kind of interesting how they did it. Luckily, it's I think it was a 50-foot lot. And you can see a parking spot for the house, parking spot for the DADU. So they just separate it pretty evenly. The builder, or the owner of this one, actually kept the house, and then they just sold the DADU, typical rental play. It was a successful project, and it was actually a very nice one. If you'd like to see it, you can always drive by. And what I love here is they have the alley access. If you can, always have an alley.
Yes, I have a question. So can you technically sell the DADU since it's on the same lot?
Mm-hmm. At the county level, you can separate it. That's the short answer.
So it will still be the same lot,
Yes.
but 2 different owners?
Yes. And we could talk about, will Seattle City Light give you 3 services? Or 2 services? You can talk about those things. How are we going to submeter? Are we going to do a private submeter? All those things. There's really boilerplate ways people have done it, and that's where Igor can have a longer conversation after this talk if you want to dive deep into details, which I love, but is unfortunately probably not the right context. But Alex.
What kind of setback requirements are there in the city, and how far do the buildings have to be apart?
Yeah, typically, I'm going to tell you what I advise. The setback requirements for the city are typically like 5 feet for side setback, and rear setback is typically like 5. Always put some separation between the alley and the backyard cottage. I've seen analyzed sale performance of them, and I've also analyzed just overall impressions of the people that are walking through. That you always want some separation if you have an alley. It has to be 5 feet, but even then, for anytime you're next to another neighbor, I would recommend 7 feet, and maybe you as the architect could advise on why that would be, but just when you're digging those foundations, you want to not have to get a temporary easement from the neighbor. All those things are coming into consideration. And then also, you want a parking pad, typically, for the backyard cottage. Everybody wants parking, and you can usually provide it. So that's another thing where, hey, just add another, I guess this would be about 11, 12 feet, and now you've got a parking space for the backyard cottage. So for more stuff, right, your next step, one thing I would just say is be curious. Like, this is kind of a new concept. There's so many more questions to be asked, right? You say, okay, well, you mentioned some numbers. What if we run the numbers this way? What if I wanted to keep both? What are my tax implications? How can I do a cost segregation study, right? Accelerate the depreciation of the backyard cottage and get a huge return from it? Yes, so there's all those questions that you'll have. Schedule a call with Igor. Igor's going to be your main guy if you want to talk about these things. And then one thing is, like, there's a lot of ways to finance these projects. So talk with your lenders. Ask them about, okay, what can I do? Because they're going to direct you the best way to actually do one of these. Yeah, thank you.
Hi there, thanks once again for watching another video. We are absolutely passionate about detached dwelling units and attached dwelling accessory units in the city of Seattle. If you want to know more of how they look, how they smell, how they are built, we have a few in the pipeline right now. Some of them are actually hitting the market this week, so you can get out there and see how it looks in the real world when it's completed. If you want to learn more about DADUs, if you want to share ideas, or you might have a property that you think could be a great fit, we'd love to consult you, to partner with you, to find a way how we can work together to achieve a common goal. Please subscribe to this channel and reach out with any questions you might have. Thank you so much.